The afternoon sun burned hot against the wide streets of the city. Expensive cars rushed past, taxis honked, and people hurried along sidewalks. In the middle of all that noise, a sleek black luxury car suddenly slowed, sputtered, and then stopped completely. Its powerful engine, the kind worth more than most people's houses, had gone silent. Inside, the billionaire tightened his jaw. He was a man used to power, used to things obeying him without question. Employees, markets, machines. But now here he was, stuck in the middle of traffic with a car that refused to move. He pressed buttons, tried the ignition again and again, but the silence of the engine mocked him. Frustrated drivers honked from behind. A few people slowed their steps, curious. It wasn't every day that a car like that, a symbol of wealth and status, just stopped working in broad daylight. Some whispered, some pointed, and soon a small crowd began to gather. The billionaire stepped out of the car, adjusting his expensive suit. Sweat glistened on his forehead, though not from the heat. It was the sting of embarrassment. He called his driver, then his assistant. Within minutes, the best mechanics were on their way. He crossed his arms and waited, trying to keep his face composed. The first mechanic arrived quickly, toolbox in hand. He examined the car, checked the battery, opened the hood. The billionaire watched impatiently as the man worked. Minutes passed, then half an hour. Finally, the mechanic shook his head. "Sir, I can't figure it out. This engine's too advanced. I'll need to call for another team." The billionaire's temper flared. "Another team? I don't care what it takes, just fix it." His voice was sharp, carrying through the crowd. Another specialist arrived, this one in a uniform with the car's brand stitched on the chest. He was supposed to be an expert, trained for these machines. He spent an hour under the hood, checking wires, testing parts, running diagnostics. But in the end, he too stepped back with a defeated look. "Sir, I'm sorry. I've never seen a failure like this." The crowd whispered louder now. Some chuckled quietly, enjoying the rare sight of a billionaire helpless. Others pulled out their phones, recording videos that would soon spread. Children pointed at the car, amazed that something so expensive could still break down like any other machine. The billionaire clenched his fists. His pride ached. He was a man who closed billion-dollar deals, who built towers of glass and steel, who controlled entire industries. Yet here he was, powerless before a silent engine. One by one, more experts came. Each one promised a solution. Each one failed. The hood opened and closed. Tools clattered against the ground, sweat dripped from foreheads, but the car remained still. The engine stayed silent, as if mocking all of them. Hours passed. The sun began to dip lower, painting the sky with streaks of orange. The billionaire's patience thinned. He had meetings to attend, dinners to host, a life that never paused. Yet here he was, stranded and surrounded by strangers who now whispered not in respect but in amusement. In the middle of the crowd, unnoticed by most, sat a young homeless girl. Her clothes were torn, her hair tangled, and dirt smudged her face. She sat on the curb with a small bag by her side, watching everything with sharp, curious eyes. Unlike the others, she wasn't mocking or laughing. She was studying. While the experts sweated over the car, she noticed small details, the way one mechanic overlooked a corner of the engine, the way another dismissed a loose connection too quickly. Her mind worked quietly, piecing things together. She had no fancy training, no expensive tools, but she had something else: observation, instinct, and the kind of problem-solving you learn when life on the streets forces you to survive with nothing. The billionaire didn't notice her. Why would he? She was invisible to men like him. To him, only experts mattered, only those with uniforms and titles. But the experts had all failed, and the car still sat lifeless, a monument to frustration. The girl hugged her bag close, her heart beating faster. She knew she could help. She knew she saw what they had missed. But how could she, a homeless girl, step forward in front of all these people? She stayed quiet, waiting, watching, her courage building slowly. The billionaire ran a hand down his face and barked into his phone, demanding yet another specialist. His voice was heavy with anger now, but beneath it was something else: desperation. For the first time in years, he faced a problem money couldn't instantly solve. The crowd kept whispering, the mechanics kept failing, and the car remained a silent beast in the middle of the street. The girl's eyes narrowed as she looked again at the engine. She could see it clearly now. The solution sitting right there, obvious to her though invisible to the men with tools. She tightened her grip on her bag, took a deep breath, and whispered to herself, If only they'd let me try. And with that thought, the story of the billionaire's engine was no longer just about wealth and power. It was about the quiet eyes watching from the sidelines, the courage building in someone everyone else had overlooked. The breakdown wasn't just the cars. It was the breakdown of pride, arrogance, and assumption, and it was only the beginning. The luxury car stood still in the middle of the busy street, its polished body reflecting the fading sunlight. The crowd around it had grown larger, like moths gathering around a strange flame. People whispered, some laughed quietly, others pulled out their phones to record. It wasn't every day that they saw a billionaire stuck helpless, his prized machine reduced to silence. The first mechanic had already failed, leaving with his head low, toolbox rattling in defeat. The billionaire's jaw was tight, his anger barely hidden behind his polished expression. He barked into his phone again, his voice sharp enough for the crowd to hear. "Get me the best. I don't care what it costs. Bring the top experts now." Within minutes, another car pulled up, sleek and branded. Out stepped a man in a crisp uniform, the company's logo stitched across his chest. This was no ordinary mechanic. He was one of the manufacturer's own specialists, trained to deal with engines worth millions. He walked with confidence, nodding politely to the billionaire. "Don't worry, sir. I'll handle this." The crowd leaned closer, expecting the problem to be solved quickly now. The expert opened the hood, set his tools neatly beside him, and began his work. His hands moved fast, checking wires, measuring levels, connecting diagnostic devices. The billionaire crossed his arms, his eyes glued to the process, waiting for the inevitable sound of the engine roaring back to life. But the roar never came. Half an hour passed, then an hour. The expert's forehead grew damp, his movements less confident, his eyes darting nervously at the silent engine. The billionaire's patience thinned. "Well?" he demanded. The specialist swallowed hard. "Sir, I've never seen this kind of malfunction before. The systems aren't responding. I can't fix it here." The words hung heavy in the air. The billionaire's face flushed with anger. The crowd gasped, some whispering louder now. The expert packed his tools in silence, avoiding the billionaire's glare as he retreated. The billionaire cursed under his breath, his voice low but sharp. "Useless. All of them." He grabbed his phone again, calling in yet another team. His pride was bruised, but more than that, his control was slipping. This was a man who could buy anything, command anyone, yet his wealth could not wake the machine before him. An hour later, two more specialists arrived together, both renowned in their field. One carried advanced scanning equipment, the other rolled in a portable computer with glowing screens. They worked side by side, cables running from the car to their devices. The crowd buzzed with excitement. Surely, with such advanced technology, the problem would finally be solved. The billionaire watched closely, pacing back and forth. He didn't speak this time, his anger simmering too hot for words. He only glared, his hands clenched, his breath short. But again, nothing. The men exchanged nervous glances, muttering technical jargon that meant nothing to the crowd. Finally, one of them turned to the billionaire with a weak smile. "Sir, this engine, it's responding strangely. We may need to tow it to the factory. Fixing it here, it's not possible." The billionaire's face darkened. "Not possible?" His voice thundered across the street. People shrank back at the sound of his fury. "Do you know who I am? Do you know how much this car is worth? And you're telling me it's not possible?" The experts stammered apologies, bowing their heads as they hurried away, their pride shattered. The billionaire stood in silence now, his chest heaving, his expensive suit clinging to him in the heat of his own rage. The crowd whispered more boldly now. "Money can't fix everything," someone muttered. Another laughed quietly. "Look at him. Billions in his account, but not a single working car." Phones recorded from every angle, capturing not just the dead engine, but the dead look in the billionaire's eyes. More mechanics came as the evening dragged on. Some were famous names, others local talents. All promised they could solve the problem. All failed. The hood opened and closed so many times it felt like a door to a mystery no one could enter. Tools clattered, scanners beeped, sweat dripped onto the pavement. Yet the engine remained silent, as if mocking every effort. By now the billionaire's pride had cracked. He stopped barking orders. He stopped boasting. He only stood there, restless, watching his empire of wealth crumble before a single broken machine. For the first time in years, he looked powerless. And still in the shadows of the crowd, the homeless girl watched. Her clothes were torn, her hair unkempt, her hands rough from the streets. But her eyes were sharp, steady, following every failed attempt. She saw the mistakes others overlooked, the impatience that blinded them, the arrogance that made them rush past the real problem. Her heart beat faster with every failure. She knew she could help. She knew she could fix it. But who would believe her? Who would listen to a girl without a home, without a title, without the right clothes? As another expert slammed his toolbox shut in defeat, muttering excuses as he walked away, the girl tightened her grip on the strap of her bag. She whispered to herself, almost like a prayer, "If only they'd let me try." The night was coming, and with it the breaking point of the billionaire's pride. The experts had failed. The crowd had lost faith, and only one pair of eyes still held the quiet certainty of a solution. By the time the third expert packed up his tools and walked away in defeat, the street had transformed. What had started as a few curious onlookers had grown into a restless crowd. People leaned against lampposts, perched on bikes, and stood on tiptoes just to get a glimpse of the billionaire's stranded car. The luxury vehicle, once a symbol of power and status, now looked like a wounded beast, its hood propped open, its silent engine surrounded by defeated mechanics. The more experts failed, the more the whispers spread. Phones stayed raised, recording every moment. Some streamed the scene live, their voices filled with excitement. "You won't believe this. Not even the best mechanics can fix it. The billionaire's car is dead." Children tugged at their parents' sleeves, pointing at the shiny machine. Street vendors stopped their sales to watch. Even people rushing home slowed their steps, drawn to the rare sight of power brought to its knees. The billionaire felt the weight of every stare. His jaw tightened, his fist clenched, but there was nothing he could do. His phone buzzed constantly with updates from assistants, but no update mattered. The truth was right in front of him. His engine was silent, and so was his pride. In the middle of the crowd, people argued in low voices. "He should just tow it," a man muttered. No, how can you tow a car like that? It's custom. Costs more than 10 houses. Still, what good is a car if it won't move?" Laughter rippled through some corners of the crowd. Others shook their heads, almost pitying the billionaire. "All that money," one woman said, "and he's just as stuck as the rest of us would be." But not everyone was mocking. A few people whispered with awe at the sheer mystery of it. "If experts can't fix it, maybe it's cursed," someone joked nervously. Another added, "Or maybe the car is smarter than the men trying to fix it." Through all of this noise, sitting quietly on the curb at the edge of the crowd, was the homeless girl. She hugged her small bag close to her chest, her knees pulled up, her eyes fixed on the car. No one noticed her. To them, she was just part of the city's background, another forgotten shadow blending into the noise. But her eyes told a different story. She wasn't watching for entertainment. She was studying. Every time a mechanic touched the engine, every time they poked wires or turned screws, she followed their hands carefully. She noticed details others ignored. The way one man skipped checking a connection because it looked fine. The way another rushed through his diagnostics, too proud to slow down and think. Her sharp mind pieced together what they had all missed. She wasn't a trained engineer, but she had a knack for machines. On the streets, she often tinkered with old radios or broken bicycles left in trash piles. Fixing things had become her survival skill, and now her instincts were telling her something very clear. The problem wasn't impossible. It was just invisible to those who weren't paying attention. As the experts failed one after another, her confidence grew quietly inside her. But so did her fear. Who would listen to her? Who would trust a girl with torn shoes and dirt on her face when even the professionals had failed? She bit her lip and stayed silent, though the thought pressed harder in her mind. "If you allow, I will try." The crowd, meanwhile, was restless. Some were growing impatient, shouting advice toward the billionaire as though their words could help. "Check the fuel," one man called. "It's the battery," another shouted. The billionaire ignored them all, his face dark with anger and embarrassment. The tension thickened. The sun had dipped lower, casting long shadows across the street. The air buzzed with heat and the murmurs of dozens of voices. This wasn't just about a car anymore. It was about pride, spectacle, and the strange power of a crowd watching someone powerful brought low. The girl shifted on the curb, her fingers tightening on her bag. She felt her courage stirring, small at first, then stronger. She couldn't sit still much longer. She knew she could help. She knew she had to, but to stand up, to step into that circle of power, to speak directly to the billionaire, it was terrifying. What if he laughed at her? What if the crowd mocked her even harder? Still, as she watched him slam his phone shut in frustration and pace beside his lifeless car, something inside her whispered louder. You can do it. You see what they don't. This is your moment. And so while the crowd jeered, debated, and recorded, the homeless girl's quiet decision was forming. The experts had failed. The billionaire's pride was cracking. And soon, for the first time, she would step out of the shadows and into the light, carrying nothing but courage and her simple words. If you allow, I will try. The crowd didn't know it yet, but the real story was about to begin. The noise of the crowd swelled and shifted like waves crashing against rocks. Some laughed, others whispered. A few shouted suggestions that meant nothing. The billionaire stood tense by his silent car, his phone clutched in his hand but no answers coming. His suit clung to him in the heat, his jaw locked in frustration. Every failed expert had chipped away at his pride, leaving him exposed in front of strangers who should have admired him but instead whispered about his helplessness. Through all of it, the girl sat still on the curb, her small bag clutched tight to her chest. Her hair was tangled, her clothes worn thin, her shoes frayed at the edges. To anyone glancing her way, she was invisible, just another shadow in the city. But inside, her mind was alive, racing faster than the murmurs around her. She had been watching closely, sharper than any camera lens could. Every failure of the mechanics was carved into her memory. She saw where they rushed, where they ignored, where pride blinded them to the simplest detail. The problem was clear in her eyes now. She was sure of it. But certainty wasn't enough. She needed courage. Her heart pounded in her chest. She stared at the billionaire, a man who seemed untouchable, a man whose world was galaxies away from hers. He had power, wealth, respect, or at least he used to until this moment. She had nothing but her eyes, her instincts, and her trembling courage. She whispered to herself so low no one could hear, "If you allow, I will try." The words gave her strength. Slowly she rose from the curb. Dust clung to her clothes, her knees weak as she stood, but she straightened her back anyway. She took a small step forward, then another, weaving through the crowd. People noticed her now, frowning, confused. "Where is she going?" Someone whispered. "Isn't that the homeless girl?" Another said. "She can't be serious," a man chuckled. Their voices pressed against her ears like sharp stones, but she kept walking. Her hands trembled as she clutched her bag, but her chin lifted. Every step felt heavier, yet stronger too. She was no longer hiding in the shadows. The billionaire noticed her when she finally broke through the circle of onlookers. He turned sharply, his eyes narrowing at the sight of this girl stepping toward him. He expected another mechanic, another expert, but instead he saw a young girl in torn clothes. His brows furrowed. She stopped a few feet away, her voice small but steady. "If you allow," she said, meeting his gaze, "I will try." The crowd erupted in laughter. Some clapped mockingly, others jeered. "Did you hear that?" One man shouted. "The homeless girl thinks she can fix what experts couldn't." Another scoffed. "What's she going to use? Hope and prayers?" The billionaire's face darkened. He opened his mouth to dismiss her, to wave her away like the rest of the crowd did every day. But then, for a brief second, their eyes locked. Her gaze wasn't mocking, wasn't begging. It was calm, certain, almost stubborn. That look made him pause. He hesitated, torn between arrogance and desperation. Pride told him to laugh her off, to send her back into the shadows. But desperation whispered that he had nothing left to lose. The best had already failed him. Perhaps she saw something they didn't. The crowd sensed his hesitation and grew louder. "Don't waste time!" one shouted. "She'll break it even more." But the girl stood her ground, her voice clearer this time. "Let me try." The billionaire stared at her for a long moment. His pride burned. How could he, a man of wealth and power, allow a homeless girl to touch his prized machine? But then he thought of the humiliation already pressing on him. He thought of the cameras, the whispers, the hours wasted. No one else had the answer. Finally, with a sharp breath, he gave a small nod. "Fine," he said coldly. "Try." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some laughed harder, shaking their heads in disbelief. Others leaned forward, curious now. The homeless girl, this fragile shadow of the streets, was being allowed to do what the world's experts could not. She didn't smile, didn't flinch. She only stepped closer to the car, her hand steady now as if the permission had unlocked her courage. She placed her bag gently on the ground and moved toward the open hood. The billionaire watched her every move, his eyes sharp, his expression unreadable. The crowd buzzed louder, phones lifted higher, recording every second. They expected her to fail. They expected her to embarrass herself. But the girl wasn't thinking about them. She wasn't thinking about the laughter, the whispers, or the disbelief. She was thinking only of the machine, of the problem she had already solved in her mind. And as she reached for the engine with steady hands, the world seemed to hold its breath. The approach was over. The moment had come. The street had gone strangely quiet, though the crowd was thick and restless. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the strange, unbelievable sight. A homeless girl standing at the hood of a billionaire's luxury car. The man himself, tall and sharp in his expensive suit, stood a few feet away, arms crossed, his jaw clenched tight. He had allowed her to try, but now that she was there, doubt swirled in his chest like a storm. He couldn't believe it had come to this. Hours ago, he had commanded the best mechanics in the city, men with glowing devices and years of training, and they had failed him one after another. Now here stood this girl, her clothes tattered, her shoes worn thin, her hands marked by the roughness of street life. How could he trust her? How could he allow her to lay a hand on what was worth millions? The crowd sensed his hesitation and began to feed on it. "This is madness," a man in the back called out. "Don't let her touch it," another laughed. "She'll make it worse." A woman scoffed loudly. "Look at her. She doesn't even have gloves, let alone tools." The billionaire's pride twisted inside him. Their words echoed his own thoughts. What was he doing? If she failed, as surely she would, he would be humiliated further. His enemies would feast on this. Already the cameras were rolling. Already the whispers were flying across the internet. A billionaire, undone by his own desperation, handing over his car to a girl with nothing, and yet... Another voice pushed quietly against his pride. "What do you have to lose? They've all failed," she asked with confidence. "What if she sees what they missed?" He studied her face again. She didn't look nervous. She didn't look like someone who was hoping for luck. Her expression was steady, focused, her eyes sharp as they studied the maze of wires and parts under the hood. It unsettled him how sure she seemed. The crowd, however, was merciless. "She's wasting time," one man barked. Another jeered. "What's she gonna do, whisper to the engine?" Laughter spread, cruel and sharp. The girl heard every word. Her ears burned, her heart raced, but she didn't back away. She had grown used to whispers, to laughter, to being unseen or dismissed. What was one more moment of mockery compared to all the nights she had slept cold on the streets? What was one more laugh compared to hunger gnawing at her belly? She straightened her back and kept her eyes on the car. She spoke again, her voice calm but clear. "If you allow, I will try." The words carried differently this time. They weren't timid, weren't pleading. They were steady, almost commanding in their simplicity. A hush fell over the immediate circle. Even the billionaire felt the weight of those words settle in his chest. His pride battled with his desperation one last time. To let her continue would make him look weak, ridiculous even, but refusing her now after he had given permission would make him look like a coward. Either way, the world was watching. He gave the faintest nod. "Do it," he said, his voice low but firm. The girl stepped closer. She set her small bag on the ground beside her feet and pulled out a few simple items. Nothing like the polished tools the experts had used. Just an old screwdriver, a worn wrench, and a cloth that had seen better days. The crowd laughed again, harsher this time. "Look at those tools. Where did she even get those, a dumpster?" "She'll break the whole thing." The billionaire's stomach knotted. His doubt clawed at him with every mocking voice. He almost stopped her, almost ordered her away. But then he caught the steadiness in her hands, the way she ignored the crowd completely. Her fingers moved over the engine as though she belonged there, as though the car had been waiting for her all along. For the first time that day, he felt something unexpected. Hope. Fragile, faint, but there. The girl leaned over the engine, her brow furrowed in concentration. She wasn't hurried like the experts had been. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was simply listening to the machine, feeling its story with her hands. The billionaire clenched his fists behind his back, his face tight with doubt. The crowd muttered and mocked, their laughter sharp and cruel. But she kept working. unshaken, her quiet determination standing against the weight of their disbelief. In that moment, though none of them knew it yet, the balance began to shift. The crowd had doubt. The billionaire had doubt. The whole world, watching through countless phones, had doubt, but the girl, she had only certainty, and soon, her certainty would silence them all. The hood of the car rose like the lid of a coffin, heavy with silence. The crowd pressed closer now, their phones lifted higher, eager to capture what they thought would be a spectacle of failure. A billionaire's pride was already broken, and now surely this girl's attempt would end in embarrassment. But the girl didn't flinch. She stood firm, her shoulders squared, her eyes fixed on the intricate maze of wires, bolts, and steel. To her it wasn't just an engine, it was a puzzle. And puzzles had answers if you knew where to look. She reached into her small bag and pulled out the tools she had carried for years. A bent screwdriver, an old wrench, and a thin piece of wire she had saved from a discarded radio. They were worn, far from shiny, but they were hers. Tools that had seen her fix broken bicycles, mend old kettles, and breathe life back into things that others had thrown away. The crowd laughed louder when they saw them. "She's joking," someone shouted. "Those aren't tools, those are scraps." Another sneered. "She'll ruin it," a third muttered, but the girl tuned them out. She leaned forward, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and placed her hand lightly against the machine. She listened, not with her ears, but with instinct. She traced wires, pressed joints, tapped lightly against the frame. Her movements were deliberate, precise, not rushed. The billionaire watched with narrowed eyes. At first, doubt filled him. He wanted to pull her away, to stop this madness before it grew worse. But something in her calmness stopped him. She moved differently than the experts. Where they had attacked the problem with arrogance, she treated it with patience, like a friend who needed understanding instead of force. Minutes passed. The crowd grew impatient. "Nothing's happening," someone shouted. "Get her out of there." But then her hands paused. She leaned closer to a small section near the back of the engine, her eyes sharp. She pressed her fingers around a wire casing, frowned, then carefully loosened a bolt that no one else had touched. Slowly she pulled back a small panel, and there it was, the fault. A single wire, frayed and barely connected, hidden in a place the experts had overlooked. It was simple, almost laughably so, but it had silenced the beast. The girl's lips curved into the faintest smile. She reached for her wire, cut it to length with the edge of her screwdriver, and began to mend the connection. Her hands were steady now, her fear gone, replaced by focus. She twisted the ends carefully, tightened the bolt, and wiped the area clean with her cloth. The billionaire leaned forward, his breath caught in his throat. The crowd, sensing something shifting, quieted. Phones were lowered slightly. The laughter died. The girl stepped back slowly, wiping her hands against her cloth. She looked at the billionaire, her eyes calm, and nodded once. "Try now," she said softly. The words hung in the air. The billionaire hesitated, doubt still clinging to him. But something about her confidence pushed him to act. He slid into the driver's seat, inserted the key, and pressed the ignition. For a heartbeat, there was only silence. The world seemed to stop, and then the engine roared to life. The sound was thunderous, powerful, filling the street with a vibration that silenced every whisper. The machine purred, smooth and strong, like a beast awakened from sleep. The headlights flared, the dashboard lit up, and the billionaire's car breathed again. The crowd gasped. Some covered their mouths, others dropped their phones in shock. A ripple of disbelief swept through them. The girl had done what no expert, no specialist, no high-paid mechanic had managed. She had fixed the billionaire's car with nothing but a few scraps of tools and her sharp eyes. The billionaire sat frozen behind the wheel, his hands gripping it tightly. He stared at the humming engine, then at the girl standing calmly beside the hood. For the first time all day, his anger was gone, replaced by something he hadn't felt in years, humility. The crowd erupted. Some cheered, some clapped, others shouted in amazement. "She fixed it," one man yelled. "With those old tools," another added. Children jumped up and down, their eyes wide with excitement. The girl didn't bask in their praise. She didn't smile or boast. She only stepped back, dusted her hands, and picked up her small bag. Her work was done, and that was enough. The billionaire climbed out of the car slowly, his face unreadable. He walked toward her, the noise of the crowd fading behind him. For a long moment he just stared at her, The girl who had been invisible an hour ago. The girl who had stepped out of the shadows to solve what billions could not. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. The weight of what had happened was too heavy, too humbling. The girl looked at him once, her eyes calm, then lowered her gaze. She whispered the same words she had said before, not as a request this time, but as a reminder. You allowed. I tried. And she had succeeded. The sound of the engine rolled through the street like thunder after a storm. Strong, steady, alive. For hours it had been silent, refusing the touch of experts, mocking the pride of men with titles and tools. But now, with a few worn scraps of metal in the hands of a homeless girl, it roared back to life as if it had never been broken. The crowd froze. For a second no one spoke, no one breathed. They stared wide-eyed, their mouths open, their phones trembling in their hands. The scene before them didn't fit into the world they thought they knew. How could this be? How could she? Someone they had mocked, dismissed, ignored, fix what none of the best could. Then the silence shattered. She did it! Someone gasped. No way, a man muttered, rubbing his eyes as though it were a dream. With that old screwdriver? Another shouted, half in awe, half in disbelief. The murmurs swelled into waves. Some people cheered, clapping loudly. Others stood frozen, still struggling to believe. A few even shook their heads stubbornly, refusing to accept what they had just seen. But no one could deny the truth. The car was alive. The girl had fixed it. The billionaire remained by the car door, his hand still on the frame, his eyes locked on her. Inside him, emotions clashed, relief, disbelief, shame, respect. His wealth, his pride, his power had all failed him in front of strangers. And yet this girl, this invisible figure from the edges of society, had restored what billions couldn't. For the first time in his life, he didn't know what to say. The girl stood calmly, her small bag clutched against her chest once more. She didn't smile, didn't bow, didn't boast. She looked at the engine as if it were nothing more than another broken thing she had fixed. Another puzzle solved. The weight of the crowd's stares didn't change her. She had done what she came to do. That was enough, but the crowd's perception shifted sharply. Where moments ago they had laughed at her, now they looked at her with awe. The same mouths that had sneered now whispered in admiration. She's brilliant. She saw what no one else could. She's not just some girl. She's a genius. Children pointed at her with wide eyes, tugging on their parents' sleeves. Did you see her? She fixed it. Better than the men with machines. The parents nodded slowly, humbled themselves, and the phones captured it all. Videos streamed live across the internet. Clips of the girl leaning into the hood, her simple tools in hand, were already being shared with captions that read, "Homeless girl outsmarts billionaire's experts." Others wrote, "Respect everyone. Talent has no uniform." The moment was already slipping beyond the street, traveling to millions of screens carried by shock and awe. The billionaire's throat tightened as he turned fully toward her. He had spent his life commanding respect, buying loyalty, building empires. But in front of this girl he felt something rare, humility. She had no wealth, no title, no reputation, yet she had given him back control of his prized possession with nothing but skill and courage. He took a step closer, his voice low but heavy. "How did you do that?" The girl met his eyes calmly. "I looked where they didn't," she said simply. Her words were not arrogant, not proud, just honest. The simplicity cut deeper than any lecture could. Around them, the crowd fell quiet again, listening. The billionaire swallowed hard. For a moment, he wanted to offer her money, to throw cash at her feet as if that could repay what she had done. But the idea felt wrong. This wasn't about money. This was about dignity, about respect. Behind him, the engine purred steadily, alive and strong. Around him, the crowd shifted from mockery to admiration. And before him, the girl stood steady, unshaken by the chaos. The billionaire's pride cracked further. He realized he wasn't the center of the story anymore. She was. And that truth, more than the broken car, more than the laughter, more than the humiliation, was what shocked him most of all. For the crowd, it was a story to tell, a video to share. For the billionaire, it was a mirror held up to his soul, and for the girl, it was just another moment of survival, though the world would remember it as something far greater. The shock was complete. No one would see her the same way again, and neither would he. The engine still hummed, smooth and steady, long after the moment of shock had passed. The billionaire stood rooted to the spot, his polished shoes against the hot pavement while the girl adjusted the strap of her worn bag. Around them, the crowd continued to murmur, their voices buzzing like bees, but the air had changed. Where laughter and mockery once lived, now there was respect. The billionaire had faced many unforgettable moments in his life. Boardrooms filled with tension, deals worth billions, victories that shaped industries. But this, he knew, would stay with him forever. Not because his car was fixed, but because of who had fixed it. A girl society had forgotten. A girl no one had believed in. The videos spread before the car had even driven away. Across the internet, screens lit up with the same caption: "Homeless girl fixes billionaire's engine after experts fail." People clicked, watched, and shared, their comments flooding in. Some praised her brilliance, others pointed out the lesson. Respect everyone, no matter who they are. Within hours, the story was global. News anchors debated it. Bloggers wrote about it. Motivational speakers quoted it. They all used the same words: dignity, courage, hidden talent. The girl who had once been invisible was now impossible to ignore. But she herself remained calm. She didn't chase the cameras or ask for praise. She walked quietly away from the crowd once the car was running, disappearing back into the streets she called home. Her steps were steady, her heart calm. She had done what she knew she could. That was enough. For the billionaire, however, it wasn't enough. The memory of her voice, "If you allow, I will try," echoed in his mind again and again. He thought of how quick he had been to dismiss her, how close he had come to sending her away. He thought of how many others in his world, people with less power than him, had been dismissed the same way. That night, he couldn't sleep. He sat in his study, the city lights stretching out below him, replaying the moment in his head. A girl with nothing had given him something no one else could. A lesson. A lesson his billions had never bought him. The next morning, he gave his assistant a single order: find her. It wasn't easy. The city was large, and she had no address, no phone, no record. But the videos worked in his favor. People had captured her face, her hands, her calm expression. Soon he had a name, a history, and a story far more heartbreaking than he could have imagined. When he finally met her again, she stood the same as before, calm, unshaken, her bag still on her shoulder. He offered her money. She refused. He offered her a home. She hesitated. But when he offered her opportunity, a chance to study, to work, to use her gift, she finally looked at him with eyes that softened. "You allowed me once," she said quietly. "I will allow myself now." And with that, her life began to change. The world watched as the girl moved from the streets to workshops, from workshops to classrooms, from classrooms to labs. Her story became one of transformation, of second chances, of what happens when talent is recognized instead of ignored. The billionaire, too, was changed. He carried her words into every room he entered. In board meetings, in negotiations, in speeches, he reminded others of the lesson she had taught him, that brilliance can come from anywhere, and respect must be given to everyone. His empire shifted not just in business, but in values. Years later, the story was still told. Parents told their children about the girl who fixed the billionaire's car. Teachers used it to remind students that true worth has nothing to do with clothes, titles, or wealth. Motivational speakers repeated her words like a mantra: "If you allow, I will try." For her, the idea of homeless girl was no longer her identity. She became known for her mind, her hands, her quiet courage. Yet she never forgot the streets, never forgot the whispers and the laughter. They became her fuel, her reminder that the world is quick to doubt. But miracles happen when someone dares to try. The car itself, the one that had failed in front of so many, was no longer just a machine. The billionaire kept it not as a symbol of wealth, but as a reminder. Whenever he looked at it, he didn't see a luxury engine. He saw a girl with a bag of scraps who had taught him humility. The legacy wasn't about the car. It wasn't even about the billionaire. It was about her. A girl with nothing had reminded the world of something priceless, that respect, courage, and opportunity matter more than power, money, or pride. And though her words had been simple, they became timeless. "If you allow, I will try." Words that changed her life. Words that changed his. Words that long after both of them were gone would remain.